This pilot didn't come out of nowhere. It took over a decade to make, and yet, in just 3 days, it reached 10 million views. So how does something take a decade to build, but only days to explode? Well, in this video, we're going to break down the impact of the Gameoverse pilot, how it managed to blow up so fast, and why this might be just the beginning. Where it all started. To understand why the Gameoverse pilot hit the way it did, you have to go back to 2009, because that's where this whole thing actually begins. Ross O'Donovan, known online as Rubber Ross, posted a small 4-episode miniseries on Newgrounds called Gameoverse. It was rough around the edges in the way that everything on Newgrounds was back then, featuring a dinosaur named Gobbles, a dolphin named Flappers, and a skater named Kickflip Macaulay, navigating the idea of a multiverse made entirely of video game worlds. The concept was genuinely interesting, but the resources weren't there to take it anywhere, so it stayed exactly what it was. A short web experiment that a small community remembered fondly. Ross later re-uploaded those original episodes to YouTube in 2013, mostly as an archive, and the idea seemed to have run its course. But here's the thing about Ross, he never actually let go of it. In July 2014, he started working on what would eventually become the 2026 version of Gameoverse, and he was transparent about it from the beginning, live streaming the entire development process on Twitch so his audience could follow along as the project took shape. That kind of openness was rare, and it meant that for years, there was a community watching this show get built in real time without ever knowing exactly when or if it would actually come out. The long road to getting it made. What makes the origin of this project genuinely difficult is how many times it almost didn't happen. Aaron Hansen, who co-wrote the series, has talked about spending years pitching Gameoverse to various studios and getting rejected every single time. At one point, Aaron decided to finance the project himself rather than wait for someone else to believe in it. And it was that persistence, that refusal to shelve the idea, that eventually got it in front of the right people. In 2017, Ross brought an early animatic of Gameoverse to Glitch Productions, the Australian animation studio behind Murder Drones and the Amazing Digital Circus, and the response from Glitch founders Luke and Kevin Lerdwichagel was immediate. Kevin later said that when they saw that animatic, they were struck right away by its world building, its creativity, and its depth, and that when the chance to collaborate came up, there was no hesitation. But even after that, the path forward wasn't straightforward. The project went into hiatus in 2020 when Ross left Game Grumps to focus on his own content, and for a while, the whole thing was back in an uncertain place. When Glitch came back to Ross and confirmed it would be a fully 2D animated series, that was when everything locked into place. Ross has said that knowing it would be 2D was the condition that made restarting from scratch feel worthwhile, and so he and Aaron did exactly that. The script went through, by Aaron's own account, around 700 different rewrites and iterations before it became what you see in the pilot. That number alone tells you something about the level of commitment that went into this before a single frame of the actual series was animated. The years of silence and the Halloween hint. For a long time after that, there was nothing officially public. The project was in development, the team was working, but outside of what the community had pieced together over the years, there was no confirmation of anything. And then, on Halloween of 2024, Ross uploaded a video to his YouTube channel that contained what many fans immediately read as a hint toward Gameoverse finally moving forward. That hint lit up the community in a way that's hard to overstate if you weren't there for it. People who had been following Ross since the Newgrounds era, people who had watched his Twitch streams back in 2014 and had held on to hope for over a decade, suddenly had something concrete to point to. The conversation around Gameoverse went from a quiet, ongoing discussion in niche corners of the internet to something that the broader animation community started paying attention to, and that shift in awareness happened months before any official announcement. The announcement and the trailer. When Glitch officially confirmed the collaboration on January 18th, 2026, and released the full trailer 5 days later on January 23rd, the reaction was immediate and loud. The trailer revealed not just the visual direction of the show, but also a voice cast that genuinely surprised people. Erica Lindbeck as Kit, Jay Schlatt as Caboodle, Chris Sabat as Warwick, Aaron Hansen voicing Gobbles and Flappers, Elsie Lovelock, and Michael Cusack. On top of that, the original score was composed by Grant Kirkhope, who did Banjo-Kazooie and GoldenEye 007, alongside Jake Kaufman, known for Shovel Knight and Shantae. That combination of names was doing a lot of work at once. People who grew up with Banjo-Kazooie had a reason to pay attention. People who followed Jay Schlatt had a reason to pay attention. Fans of Has Been Hotel, fans of Dragon Ball Z, fans of Game Grumps, fans of indie web animation going back to Newgrounds, all of them had a reason to care about this specific project, and the announcement made sure all of those communities knew it existed. May 15th, 2026, The Explosion. The pilot dropped on May 15th, 2026 on Glitch Productions' YouTube channel, and what happened over the next 72 hours is what makes this story worth telling. In 3 days, the Gameoverse pilot reached 10 million views, and to understand why that number is significant, you have to look at where it sits next to the other series Glitch has launched. Murder Drones, which became one of the most talked about indie animated series of its era, took 10 months to reach 10 million views on its pilot. The Amazing Digital Circus, which was a genuine viral phenomenon, did it in 4 days. Gaslight District took 6 days. Knights of Guinevere took 5 days. Gameoverse did it in 3, which means it just set the fastest record in Glitch Productions' entire history. Not just faster than their average, faster than everything they had released before it, including Digital Circus, which at the time felt like a ceiling that would be difficult to match. The community reaction in those first 72 hours was a combination of things you don't always see at the same time. Genuine shock from people who hadn't known this was coming, deep emotional investment from fans who had been following Ross since 2014, widespread meme creation, fan art appearing within hours of the upload, and a wave of video essays and reaction content that kept the algorithm pushing the pilot to new audiences all weekend. Why it hit so hard, the real reasons. If you want to understand why Gameoverse exploded the way it did, you have to look past the hype and think about what was actually working in its favor from a structural standpoint, because a few things came together at exactly the right moment. The first is accumulated trust. Ross O'Donovan has been part of online communities for over 2 decades, first on Newgrounds, then as part of Game Grumps for 7 years, then building his own audience on YouTube and Twitch that at the time of the pilot had over 2.3 million followers. These are people who had watched him work, followed his streams, and in many cases had been aware of Gameoverse as a project for years. When the pilot finally came out, a significant portion of the audience was not discovering something new. They were watching something they had been rooting for finally arrive. The second is the quality of the product itself. The 2D animation, the voice cast, the original score, the premise, the way the pilot establishes its world without over-explaining it, all of those things held up under the kind of close audience scrutiny that comes with a highly anticipated release. It didn't just meet expectations built over a decade, in a lot of ways, it exceeded them. And when something does that, word of mouth carries it far beyond the initial audience. The third is the glitch effect. By 2026, Glitch Productions had built a track record of launching animated series that punch significantly above what you'd expect from an independent studio. Their audience was already primed to give a new series a genuine shot, and the fact that Gameoverse came with Ross's name, Aaron's name, and a cast full of recognizable voices meant it had multiple entry points for different communities to latch onto simultaneously. And underneath all of that is something harder to quantify, but easy to feel when you watch the pilot. This show was made by people who cared about it for a very long time. That doesn't always translate into quality, but when it does, audiences tend to sense it. What this might mean for what's coming. The pilot being this successful this fast matters beyond the view count because it changes the conditions under which the rest of the series gets made and released. When a project goes from being a long in development passion project to a documented record breaker in the same week, the conversation around it shifts. It's no longer a question of whether Gameoverse has an audience, it's a question of how the show keeps that audience and what it does with the creative space it's now clearly been given. For Ross, who spent over a decade building toward this and went through multiple versions of the project before arriving at the one that finally made it out, this kind of reception is not a small thing. He said before the pilot released that he hoped what he made was truly the greatest version of this show that could have ever been conceived. And based on what the numbers and the community reaction tell us, a lot of people agree with him. Over a decade is a long time to believe in something, and 3 days is a very short amount of time for the internet to decide that something matters. The fact that both of those things are true about the same project says something about what happens when you actually commit to getting something right, no matter how long it takes. If you're as excited about Gameoverse as I am, and you want to keep following this series as it develops, subscribing is the best way to make sure you catch everything I put out on it going forward. And if something I said in this video surprised you, or if you've been following Ross's work since the beginning and have a perspective worth sharing, drop it in the comments because I genuinely want to hear from people who have been in this community longer than most. See you in the next one.